You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. It's Thanksgiving in the United States, so I hope everyone is enjoying this time with their family and loved ones. Now, it's interesting because back home in Australia, when I was growing up, Thanksgiving meant one thing to me, and this is going to sound ridiculous, I know, but it meant only one thing, and that meant that one thing was American football and some good NFL games to be played. But now, of course, it means much more to me that I live here in the United States of America. But let's go back to the NFL for a second, and more specifically, the Rams and Chiefs game from Monday night that all sports fans are talking about. Now, if you're from a different country or if you don't follow the NFL, we saw two 9-1 teams square off on Monday night, and they lit up the scoreboard. They both combined, but they combined for over 100 points. Now, usually when you get that big of a combined score in the NFL, the final result will be something like 62-38 or something of that nature, right? And the game is never really in doubt. A lot of those points are garbage points. But on Monday night, the final score was 54 to 51, which shows you just how close these teams were to each other despite the high scoring. Now, you might be asking, and rightly so by the way, why am I talking about this game on the NBA podcast? Well, since that game, there's been almost a universal praise from fans and media about how exciting that clash was. And my point that I wanted to make was you've got to be careful what you wish for. The NBA, and don't worry, I'm not confusing myself. I'm not talking about the NFL and accidentally saying the NBA, but the NBA itself has taken dramatic steps to reduce defensive competitiveness, especially on the perimeter, and to speed up the pace of the games to get more shots, because more shots obviously means more opportunities to score. The end result is we've seen a huge inflation in scoring amongst the league, and it's hurting the game in terms of popularity. Sure, the Derrick Rose performance was special, and it got everyone talking. But let's look at other examples from this season. Did anybody truly care when Kemba Walker scored 60 points? I mean, it got attention, but nobody really even mentions it now. 60 points was a big deal back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I'm talking a couple of years ago. Do you remember when Carmelo Anthony scored 62 points against, they were the Bobcats, in Madison Square Garden? They weren't even the Hornets at that stage. People talked about that. They still talk about that in New York. Nobody's talking about what happened with Kemba Walker. Blake Griffin, another example. He dropped 50, and it's not brought up. Jamal Murray from Denver. He scored 48 points against the Celtics. But that actually made more headlines because he was going for 50 when the game was out of reach. LeBron did the same thing, staying in the game with less than a minute to go, and the Lakers were up by 13, to ensure he reached this magical milestone. But just like triple-doubles, scoring 50 points or even higher, that's just not a big deal anymore because of the pace. So it's pretty much the equivalent of a player scoring 35 or 40 points during the 90s or the early 2000s. So if you're an NFL fan, and you love what happened on Monday, and I'm one of those guys too, because I was stayed up to watch that game. I was blown away by what I saw. But honestly, just hope it's in moderation, because if that's the norm, then it won't mean anything, and nothing is worse. Of course, when I'm talking in terms of a sporting context, but nothing is worse than when you see professional athletes not even attempting to play defense. Because to quote the great Ray Lewis, effort is between you and you. And what that means is, only you can answer yourself whether you've put in 100%. And if you're only putting in 50%, because that's defense, right? Defense is half of the game. It doesn't matter if you're putting 100% onto one side of the court. If you put 0% on the other side, that's only 50%. And that's an insult not just to yourself, not just to the game, not just to the fans, but the people who made it possible for you to actually make this kind of money. And if you don't respect the game, you must be doing it for the money. Now, if you think that I'm being too critical, let's look at this a little bit closer. Why is it that despite all of these outbursts offensively, an alleged golden era of offense in the NBA, the majority of the attention in the NBA is surrounding or is centered around gossip and drama, and not about what's happening on the court. Just think about that. Because if the product is so good, manufactured news still somehow outweighs the actual performances. It's because, one, the players aren't competing defensively, and that almost renders those big games meaningless. Look, think back. Just think back a little bit further, right? I mentioned Carmelo Anthony a second ago, but think back a little bit further. Think back to when LeBron James, someone who I apparently hate according to a lot of you guys, think back to when LeBron scored 48 or 49 points, whatever it was, against the Pistons in the conference finals. That meant something because of the defensive intensity that he faced. The same with Game 6 against the Celtics in 2012. If he did that today, just like he did it in the playoffs last season, those numbers don't mean anything because the defense doesn't mean a thing in today's game. And it makes the game, to purists at least, almost impossible to watch. It makes it great for the guys who have never played competitive sports or sit around on 2K all day. It makes it great for those guys. But to those who have played, even something as inconsequential as pickup games, it's boring. There's more defense in a game of horse than there is in the NBA right now. And with the inflated numbers, and the inflated numbers are the proof of this. It's not that today's players are more skilled. If they were more skilled, we wouldn't see so many rules being ignored by the officials, such as moving screens or pushing defenders off or flopping or traveling not being called. The offense would just come organically. This is why I think only a handful of players that are all-stars now would be even close to starters in the 90s. It's one thing to score 50 points or 48 points against a wide-open paint and defenders being thrown around by moving screens or being pushed off or the ball handler being allowed seemingly unlimited steps. And it's another thing to score against disciplined defenses who take pride in their roles and their jobs. The best example of this is Isaiah Thomas. And no, I am not referring to the real Isaiah Thomas. I'm talking about the midget one. And he was able to score 28.9 points per game a couple of seasons ago due to this. Do we really think that this would have happened in the 90s? And if you dare say that, well, look at what look at Allen Iverson, he did it. Please do me a favor and turn this show off right now and head down to the church or wherever and ask for forgiveness for comparing Thomas to him. And for the record, I have no problems with the comparison of the real Isaiah Thomas and Iverson, not the 5'9" Isaiah Thomas. There is a huge difference in terms of heart and competitiveness and leadership between those two. And it's so big, the difference level is so big, it's like comparing Harold Miner to Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. And quite honestly, it's not even worth getting into. But the things, as I mentioned before, worthy of talking about right now, it seems to be just the drama because the product on the court, it's pathetic. And the league needs to stop being such a gossipy cesspool. It's annoying. Just look at the Wizards right now. Yes, they suck. We know that. There's a good chance that Dwight Howard will be out of the league after this season. But let's look at them. They're what? They're 6-11, something like that. They have a team loaded with talent, right? I mean, better than 6-11 in terms of talent. But what if they were 11-6? Would we talk about them? Of course not. Instead, I get double-digit emails regarding John Wall cursing out his coach. Who gives a fuck? Seriously. Some of these guys will be traded, probably including John Wall, but who cares? Let's talk about the potential trade destinations or why they have struggled, but I couldn't care less if he cursed his coach out. Just like I couldn't care less about Jimmy Butler showing up the Timberwolves' infatuation with complacency and mediocrity. Fans have got to stop falling for these WWE-style storylines and start demanding that the product become more competitive. Otherwise, the league will at some point decline. Because what will happen? what will happen? Those 14 or 15-year-olds on Twitter or Instagram, they don't bankroll the NBA. Based off the emails I get, and I'm assuming most of these guys that are on Twitter or on Instagram, they don't even watch the games, let alone go to the games. The important demographic are the fans that put the money into the games. And if there's one thing that I've learned about doing this podcast or even being over here and talking to fans, is they don't like being taken for fools. This is why there was such an outrage, and rightfully so, when players seemingly took delight in sitting out of games because they were, well, I don't know. Look, I'll let you finish that sentence. But I know what I would have said to them had they had sat in front of me, smiling and waving and almost mocking the fans at the games. The fans that actually paid money to see these idiots, and they were seemingly taking delight. That's how little they think of fans. And I know exactly what I would have said to them in that situation. However, I won't repeat it on the podcast. Because there's certain things that probably will... Let's just be honest. Certain things are better left unsaid. Regardless, everyone has a breaking point on something that they're passionate about. And if you care about something, and it doesn't matter what it is, but if you care about it, it's because you like it at the end of the day. And you like it because you have expectations and standards. Now, nothing is perfect, of course, except for my upcoming book. And we'll give plenty of leeway because of loyalty. But after a while, we either won't care enough, or at best, we won't care as much. And if the only thing keeping the NBA interesting right now is the drama, then I'd be worried if I was them. Because because they skew the numbers so much. And you might be wondering what I'm talking about. And it's simple. The league lies about what a strong position they are in. And if you want an example, just look at the Detroit Pistons. They have a star player in Blake Griffin, a well-known and a marketable star player in Blake Griffin, I should add. They have a brand new arena in the middle of Detroit. They have the reigning coach of the year. Their team is currently 8-6, and they are in 5th spot in the Eastern Conference. And yet, despite all this, the next game you watch, look at all the empty seats. It's unbelievable. Now, keep in mind, they don't even have the upper decks open because the fans just don't want to go to the games. They're virtually giving free upgrades to the fans. And yet, despite all that, despite how bad their attendance is, they will claim that they sell out 65 to 70% of the seats. It's bullshit. The proof of all this is despite their claims, and if the league was rolling in money the way they claim to be, why did they have to bring in advertisements on the jerseys? It just doesn't make any sense at all, because like I said before, it's bullshit. Leagues that are desperate for cash will bring in advertisements on jerseys, unless, and the only exception to this is European soccer. And the reason for that is they've always done that. And that's huge. That's a huge part of their revenue. They didn't have to introduce that just recently. The fact that the NBA had to introduce it, that tells you everything. Now, this is actually a good segue into the WNBA, because I've received a couple of emails regarding the players opting out of their deal with their league, which is essentially a nice way of calling a strike. And I don't know the next time I'll actually talk about the WNBA ever again. So let's get it over with now. And these players are idiots. There's just no other way to describe it. They have no idea how business works. It's either that, or they know how business works, and they just want to play the equality card and hope the NBA, who subsidizes the WNBA, feels guilty enough and gives them more money. Because let's look at the numbers. The WNBA loses approximately $12 million a year. Okay, so let me try to understand this. At this time, the WNBA players receive 20% of the revenue. Can we underline that as revenue? Because it's not profit. Because if it was profit, they would be billed every year instead of being paid because the league is losing money. even with 20% of the revenue, the WNBA loses money. In order to continue operating, the WNBA is subsidized by the NBA. Yet the women are asking for a raise comparable to what the NBA players receive in terms of essentially the profits of the NBA. So if, let's say, the women get a raise and they get paid 35% of the revenue, not the profit, by the way, the revenue, where is the money going to come from? The only place it can come from is in the form of the largest subsidy from the NBA. Basically, these women are asking for bigger handouts from the NBA, which ironically are men. The WNBA is supposedly a league where they are trying to promote gender equality. This women, quote unquote, women can do it too mantra, yet they are looking for men to carry them. The product itself is bad. It's horrible. I can't even watch it. I would prefer to watch a G League game. I would prefer to watch, 8th grade high school basketball in the middle of Australia than a WNBA game. And to quote the great Vince McMahon, you can't shine Kaka. That should be a t-shirt, by the way. That was amazing. So instead of the players acknowledging the issues and doing what it takes to make the league more marketable, and there's plenty they can do, by the way, they can start promoting their stuff on their Instagram pages, on their Twitter accounts. You don't see them do that. Those accounts, and especially the ones of people that are standing up for the WNBA now, the Katie Nolans, right? They show pictures and check-ins of them going to Boston Red Sox games or to professional sports games of men, but yet they will stamp their feet in front of a camera and saying the WNBA deserves more money, yet they themselves will not support it. Anyway, and that's not even the players. The players should be doing even more than that. You check out, say, let's compare Damian Lillard's Twitter account or Instagram account and how much he's actually publicizing the league himself or the Blazers himself. Compare that to any star of the WNBA, and it's night and day of a difference. And as I said before, they need to do what it takes to make the league more marketable. They are, quote unquote, they're going around with the mindset of women are just as talented as men. This is their argument, by the way. They work harder than men. They don't get recognized simply because of prejudice and patriarchy. Sexism and prejudice is the only thing that is holding women back, which is not only completely untrue, by the way, but it alienates any self-respecting man from wanting to support the league, because how the hell is this a male versus female thing? But okay, fine. Prove it. Prove it to me. If prejudice is the only thing holding women back, then prove it. Prove to me that a female league can be successful. I will believe you if you prove it. Prove it by getting a female audience. Prove it by making a successful female league. Go ahead. It's funny how no feminists fight for women to win in chess tournaments. No feminists are fighting for women to win the World Series of Poker tournaments. No feminists are out there fighting for more female stock market day traders. And yet chess, poker, and day trading are predominantly male-dominated areas. How come you never hear feminists complaining about men being more successful at these things than women? They don't complain about them because winning chess, poker, or the stock exchange, or being on the stock exchange, that has nothing to do with prejudice. The cards will come down the way they're going to come down in a poker game. There is no difference between a male and a female in terms of athletic ability when they're playing chess, for example. But they stick to the causes that are dependent on other people's decisions. That way they can avoid personal responsibility. They don't fight for the things that women could just win if they were good enough. They fight for things that involve opinions, and that way they can avoid all personal responsibility. They are trying to make the WNBA's lack of success a prejudice problem, or they're going to blame the patriarchy. The WNBA does not have a prejudice problem. It has a lack of accomplishment problem. The truth is, the WNBA would be successful if enough women wanted to watch. This goes for you, Katie Nolan. And the truth is, the WNBA has only lasted this long because of the support of the NBA. There is a reason why sports like lingerie football are not only surviving, but they're growing. They embrace the fact that they're females, and they don't try to be men. The same with female tennis players and female MMA fighters. They don't alienate men or entire political groups. The WNBA is nothing more than an entitled SJW political group. And despite what Twitter and ESPN told them, sports fans that are willing to invest money into buying tickets do not like being talked down to or told they have to support something simply because they are of a specific gender. And for far too long, the WNBA has done that, and it's finally caught up to them. So good luck to the WNBA players, and when the time comes and the league falls apart. Good luck going to play in Europe or whatever. But I'll be the first to say it right now. The WNBA will not be missed. Now back to the NBA. And quite a bit has happened since my last episode. I need to take a breath after that little rant about the WNBA. But one of the biggest storylines was Golden State. And they're experiencing some hiccups in maybe their worst stretch since the 2016 finals. And definitely the worst stretch that they've encountered since Kevin Durant has come. Now, I wouldn't be concerned with their record, but what I would be worried about is if Kevin Durant has checked out mentally since his clash with Draymond Green. Now, if he is that weak mentally, then I take back everything I said about him saving the Warriors, or the Warriors needing him more than he needed the Warriors. On top of that, if he's checked out now, that would be a good indication that he's about to leave via free agency this offseason. Now, if you're Boston, would you pull the trigger on this? Let's weigh it up. Let's just say Boston would give up Gordon Hayward, Terry Rozier, and a couple of first-round picks that have value, because the Celtics have accumulated quite a few draft picks. So it wouldn't be their own picks they'd be trading, because they don't have a whole lot of value. But I'm talking about, let's say, the Sacramento Kings pick, for example. And just say they made that package and they offered that to Durant. Would you be tempted if you were Golden State? Because this trade would make sense for the Warriors, but only if they feel that Kevin Durant will not return next season and he's checked out mentally for this season. By bringing in Hayward and Rozier, that would give them scoring and depth, plus picks to trade or to draft for players themselves. Obviously, they wouldn't be as good on paper or even on the eye test if they kept Durant, but it gives them options moving forward, as opposed to losing him for nothing in the off-season. Now, from Boston's standpoint, even if Durant still leaves in the off-season, they would have unloaded Gordon Hayward's contract, which will give him the space to re-sign Kyrie Irving and keep Brown and Tatum. If they can keep Durant, fine, great. That's fantastic. That's a great result for them if they can keep him. But if not, this will allow them to keep their core in place as well. And I mentioned what their core was a second ago of Kyrie Irving, Brown, and Tatum. There are huge questions as to whether they can do this if they have Hayward's contract. So just for the record, though, I want to make this totally clear. I don't think this deal goes down. But I do think it makes the most sense to at least explore some options if you're Golden State, if Durant is done mentally, and there are all the indications that are out there that he's going to leave. And quite honestly, they are all pointing towards that. Now, as for trades, the Jimmy Butler deal went down. And at the time, I said this was an indictment on Fultz. And perhaps a sign that Philly is giving up on him, or they're resigned to the fact that he could be beyond the point of saving. The idea of a lineup of Embiid, Simmons would be at the 4, obviously, in this situation, although it really doesn't even matter anymore. And then you'd have Butler at the 3, Redick at the 2. You know, that's a really strong core. And I'm shaking my head as I'm about to say this, but it makes you wonder, though, if they could somehow salvage Fultz. Man, fuck. That would have been such a good lineup. Can you imagine that lineup going up against the Celtics for the next 5 or 6 years? Obviously, Redick, there's the window is closing on his career at some point too. But if you had a young core with some veterans already now, man, the next 5 years with that lineup up against Boston. And then you got other teams like Milwaukee and Toronto that are all in the place. Man, that would have been... that's so disappointing. And I hate to finish the show up on this, but we're going to finish up on Melo. And we've never seen a fall from grace more drastic than this since probably Allen Iverson. Now, when this decision was made... when this decision was made by Houston, I said it better work, because what other excuses could they use for their bad start? But the reality is it has worked. Whether it was direct and Carmelo was the problem, or indirectly and it just woke everyone up, that's irrelevant. They've won 4 straight games now, and they're back in playoff contention. And it proves the point in basketball, sometimes less is more. But what's next for Carmelo? His options are shrinking. Either he retires, or his last saving grace might be if a team like Minnesota is competitive for a final playoff spot, despite just dealing Jimmy Butler, but they need scoring, consistent scoring, at least off the bench. And just say Thibs wants to keep his job, and that's dependent essentially on him making the playoffs, he would sign Melo. Beyond that, I don't know. I truly don't know. I can't see a whole lot of teams that would be interested in him. Maybe the big 3, and I'm not saying that to be a jerk. I think maybe that would be the next time we would see Carmelo Anthony play basketball. We may have to just be ready to accept the fact that we've seen the last of him in the NBA, or at least playing basketball, which is disappointing because this guy is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. An argument can be made, a legitimate argument can be made, that he is the greatest United States Olympic basketball player in the history of that event. And for him to just get kicked to the curb the way that he has so quickly, it's kind of disappointing. But the same thing happened to Iverson. So we shouldn't be too surprised by this. It does happen in the NBA. But that's where we're going to wrap up the show. Please stay safe these holidays. Travel safe and enjoy the time with your family and friends. And I'll catch you on the next episode, guys.